Joining us now is Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Thanks so much for being with us, Jamil. It's good to see you again. We saw what I'll call a radical change in tone from the president yesterday on Ukraine, with complimentary words about President Zelensky, saying now that the country's in a position to fight and take all of Ukraine back. So help shed some light on this. What are you hearing as far as what that means in terms of territory? Does that include Crimea?
Well, look, President Trump has definitely shifted his tone significantly, but this is not surprising in a lot of ways. Vladimir Putin has created this for himself. President Trump tried to get him to do a deal, told him from the beginning of his administration that he was open to a deal, ready to pressure Ukraine into getting a deal, was offering to cut Ukraine off from American supplies in order to get a deal done, met with Putin in Alaska, but Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to know how to take yes for an answer. And as we all knew, because he has designs well beyond just the parts of Ukraine that he has now, as he did with Crimea in the Obama administration. So President Trump appears to have learned that, and after having seen what happened in these NATO countries, the drone overflights, and now armed MiG overflights, MiG-31s just this weekend over Estonia, President Trump is clearly saying maybe we double down on Ukraine and really give them what it takes to fight and win. And so we'll see how this plays out. We'll see if, in fact, the president actually does provide more military equipment to Ukraine. But this is definitely a change in tone, and maybe it's an approach to try and get Vladimir Putin back to the table. We'll see if it's successful.
Do you think that those incursions into NATO airspace was the catalyst here, or do you have any clue as to what else might have been the reason for this change in tone?
Look, it's hard to know what caused President Trump to change his mind on any given topic, but certainly it's hard to imagine that the multiple incursions over Romania, over Poland, over Estonia now, and having manned fighter jets, MiG-31s, fly over Estonia, resulting in, by the way, the scrambling of F-35s and NATO F-35s from Italy, Finland, and Sweden. I mean, that says something right there. And clearly President Trump is frustrated with Vladimir Putin. He's indicated that before on social media. But Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to get the message. And so we'll see. I think the right approach for the president now, if he really means what he said, is to really double down on Ukraine, make sure the Europeans and us provide them all that they need, provide Zelensky and his team all they need to win this fight, really take to the Russians. They're willing to put their lives on the line. They're not asking us to put any lives on the line. So let's give them the equipment they need to try and fight and win, take back their territory that was invaded first under President Obama, and then an invasion expanded under President Biden. See if they can't get back at least eastern Ukraine. Crimea is a different story, but that would be the right thing to do as well.
Okay, but this isn't the only change in tone we've seen. I mean, we saw a lot of Republican members of Congress say, we don't want to give Ukraine anything else. We've given them enough. So how does the president get that message through to those members in Congress?
Yeah, that's a hard one, in part because there were a lot of Republicans who were very supportive of the Ukraine effort. Some of them were less supportive under President Biden because they didn't see a plan to win. But we've seen increased Republican support. But I think a lot of them have backed off because President Trump was indicated to them it wasn't the thing that he wanted to do and he wasn't going to do. Now that he's talking positively about Ukraine, it very well could be that Republicans who otherwise would support fighting Russia, would support supplying weapons to our friends in Europe against a major adversary like Russia. By the way, a major adversary who's got North Korean troops on the ground, Iranian drones flying, and tons of support from China. I think that this is an opportunity now for Republicans to step up and be the party of national security like we historically have been, but it backed off when the party thought that President Trump wasn't there for whatever reason.
I know that Republican Senator Steve Daines once told me that he considered Vladimir Putin a terrorist. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov today. Certainly, Russia can't be happy about this shift, especially after that meeting in Alaska where the red carpet was rolled out literally for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Do you see this as a permanent shift in tone?
It's hard to know. It would be great if it were a permanent shift in tone. It's the right shift in tone for the United States. Russia is an enemy. They are allied with our enemies, North Korea, China, Iran, and they have been for a long time. And so, the president saying it out loud and recognize that is great. If it's a permanent change, that's the right answer. But even if it's a temporary change, it's the right place for the country to be. And a recognition that they are a very real threat, not just to Ukraine, which isn't a NATO member, but to our friends in NATO, to whom we have a clear commitment to defend if they're attacked. And so, President Trump knows about Article 5. He understands it, and I think shares the view that if NATO were attacked, we'd need to defend them. And so he doesn't want NATO attacked. He doesn't want NATO threatened. And at the end of the day, I think he now sees Vladimir Putin for who he is. And by the way, it's worth noting that my old boss, President Bush, once famously said that he saw into Putin's soul and saw somebody he could deal with. President Obama at one point saying, hey, give me a little room after the midterms and I can work with you. So we've had multiple presidents fooled by Vladimir Putin before, but they all eventually came around to realizing that who he is and what he stands for. That he's just an unresolved KGB, operative who wants to see the Soviet Union reestablished. President Trump, I think, is realizing that and doing the right thing, and hopefully he stays there.
Okay, so back to the incursions into NATO airspace. Where is your concern? Where is your level of concern about escalation if NATO countries start shooting Russian aircraft out of the sky like President Trump said they should yesterday?
Well, look, I do really worry about that. And look, it's no one's fault but the Russians, right? Nobody else is threatening Russia. Nobody else is challenging Russia. They're the ones flying their manned and unmanned assets into NATO territory and trying to provoke something. And so if somebody gets shot down, if a plane or more gets shot down, that's on the Russians. That being said, I think we need to take every effort to avoid that. This is the world's largest nuclear power. We're the second largest. Enough weapons on both sides to basically bring the world into chaos. Nobody wants any of that, right? And so as a result, we need to be cautious here, but the Russians are the one doing it. And to be honest with you, this is what they understand. They understand force. So I'm not a fan right now shooting down any manned aircraft, but we should shoot down every single drone that comes. And if Russia continues to do this, then that's a different conversation to be had. But everyone in NATO should understand that if we shoot down...
Okay, we lost our connection.